Conceptually, the pumping lemma for regular languages is pretty straightforward. If a string has more characters than a DFA has states, then it must loop through a portion of the DFA. We should be able to exploit any regular language with this rule. We find its pumpable piece and repeat it ad nauseum, generating an arbitrarily long string. But when a language has rules where pieces of the string refer to each other, things break down. The pumping lemma shows us how such a set of rules is impossible to fit into a DFA. The pumping lemma for context-free languages, while much more daunting at first, is really just a longer version of the one for regular languages. We split a word into multiple pieces and give each of them constraints based on a magical pumping number. It's the same thing, just with more steps involved. Before we prove the context-free pumping lemma, two important things need to be pointed out. First, any context-free grammar can be written in such a way that any variable produces at most two other variables, meaning the parse tree for the grammar will be a binary tree. If there is a variable that produces more than two, we can just move some of them down a line like this. Okay, second, all terminals can be generated from variables that produce nothing but terminals. This is also easy to see. Any terminal that doesn't follow this rule can be replaced with a variable that generates it, like this. Grammars that are put into these constraints, as well as a few more, are said to be in Chomsky normal form. Okay, time to tackle this thing head on. Consider the binary parse tree of a context-free grammar. Just like in the regular pumping lemma, our goal is to force our parse tree to repeat a variable. Suppose our tree is generated from a word so long that the maximum height is equal to the number of variables in the grammar plus 1. This means that the longest path from the root to a leaf must repeat a variable. By the pigeonhole principle, we won't have enough variables to guarantee a unique one for each tree node. For simplicity, let's only have one repeating variable. Call it a. Since a is an internal variable, it must generate a piece of our string. Tracing out exactly what it generates gives us a clearer picture of what is going on. Looking at the bottom of our parse tree where every variable is generating one terminal, we've created 5 pieces of our string. We'll label them u, v, x, y, and z. U and z are independent of a. They lie outside its region of influence. V and y are regions that are generated by the first a variable but are independent of the inner one. Finally, x is the piece that a generates by itself. So what does this tell us? Well, we know that a can eventually generate x, but we also know that it can generate another copy of a, flanked by v and y. When we replace that a with vay, we get vvayy. Doing this recursively means a can generate v to the I, a, y to the I. So rather than u, v, x, y, z, our final string instead can be written u, v to the I, x, y to the I, z, with 2 pieces repeating the same number of times. Keep in mind that v can be the empty string, so nothing happens when it repeats, only y gets copied. The same is true for y when it's empty. But since the top a must generate pieces of the string, v and y can't both be empty at the same time. The length of v and y must be equal to or greater than 1. Now all of this is only true when our string reaches a certain length threshold, the magical pumping number p. So the final requirement for the pumping lemma lies in constraining our variables around p. So let's say in a worst case scenario, the string only repeats once, at a, then a again. Well, any substring we choose won't have repetition in its parse tree until we hit the edge of v and y. That substring's parse tree contains both copies of a. So once the substring vxy is bigger than the pumping number, we must have gone through a loop. The only way we could continue is by adding other copies of v and y. So the length of vxy must always be less than or equal to our pumping number. And there it is, the 3 rules that make up the context-free pumping lemma. There are fantastic parallels between this and the regular pumping lemma. 3 simple rules, one involving recursion, one with a minimum length of 1, and one with a maximum length of a pumping number. Hopefully after seeing this video, the context-free pumping lemma feels a lot less daunting and more of a natural extension of the regular one. Thank you for watching.